As the sun set over the sprawling city of Chicago, the bustling streets below seemed to fade into the background of the towering hospital where the Johnson family gathered. The air inside was heavy with anticipation and anxiety as they awaited news about James, the family patriarch. Sarah, the eldest daughter, paced nervously in the waiting room, her mind racing with thoughts of what the future might hold. Meanwhile, Emily, James's devoted wife of 40 years, sat beside her son, David, in the hospital cafeteria. They shared a somber silence, each lost in their own thoughts. David, a successful lawyer, had rushed to Chicago from his busy life in New York City as soon as he heard the news. He felt a sense of guilt for not being there for his family sooner. In room 312, James lay in his hospital bed, surrounded by the beeping monitors and sterile white walls. The doctors had just delivered the devastating news. James had a rare and aggressive form of cancer, and his prognosis was grim. He had only a few months left to live. The family gathered around James's bed, trying to process the news. Emily held James's hand tightly, her eyes brimming with tears. She had been his rock through thick and thin, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. Sarah, who had always been the emotional one in the family, collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. David stood stoically, his jaw clenched in an attempt to hold back his own tears. He felt a surge of anger at the unfairness of it all. As the reality of the situation sank in, the family began to reminisce about happier times. They shared the stories of family vacations, holiday gatherings, and simple moments of joy that they had shared over the years. Despite the sadness that hung in the air, there was a sense of warmth and love that enveloped them. As the night wore on, the family's thoughts turned to the future. How would they cope with James's illness? How would they say goodbye? And most importantly, how would they go on without him? As the clock struck midnight, the Johnson family made a solemn vow to cherish every moment they had left with James. They would support each other through the difficult days ahead, and they would make sure that James's final days were filled with love and comfort. And so, as the city slept, the Johnson family stood united in their grief, facing the unknown future together. The diagnosis had changed everything, but one thing remained unchanged: their love for each other and their determination to make the most of the time they had left with their beloved patriarch. The next morning, the sun rose over Chicago, casting a soft light over the city. In room 312, James slept fitfully, his face lined with pain and exhaustion. Emily sat by his bedside, her hand gently stroking his hair. She had barely slept, the weight of the previous day's news still heavy on her heart. Sarah and David arrived at the hospital early, their eyes red from crying. They joined their mother by James's bedside, and together they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As the day wore on, the family's thoughts turned to the revelation that James had shared the day before. Emily couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at her. How could James have kept such a secret from her for so long? David, too, was struggling to come to terms with the news. He had always looked up to his father, but now he felt a sense of disillusionment. How could he reconcile the man he thought he knew with the man who had kept such a monumental secret? Sarah, ever the peacemaker, tried to lighten the mood. She shared the stories of her childhood, of the times when James had been a loving and devoted father. But even her memories couldn't erase the pain of the present. As the day turned to night, the family decided to take a break from the hospital. They went to a nearby restaurant where they shared a meal and tried to distract themselves from the heaviness of their thoughts. But as they sat around the table, the weight of the situation pressed down on them. Emily finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with emotion. She demanded answers from James, wanting to know why he had kept his secret for so long. James, who had been quiet throughout the meal, finally spoke. He explained that he had kept the secret to protect his family, to shield them from the pain of his past mistakes. He admitted that he had been wrong to keep the truth from them, and he asked for their forgiveness. Emily, her heart breaking, reached out to James. She told him that she forgave him, that she understood why he had done what he had done. She vowed to stand by him until the end, no matter what. David too found it in his heart to forgive his father. He realized that James had been trying to protect them, even if his methods had been flawed. He promised to support his father in whatever way he could. And so, as the night drew to a close, the Johnson family found a measure of peace. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew that they would face it together as a family united in love and forgiveness. The following day dawned bright and clear, but the atmosphere in room 312 was somber. James's condition had worsened overnight, and he was now too weak to speak. Emily sat by his bedside, holding his hand and whispering words of comfort. Sarah and David arrived at the hospital early, their faces drawn with worry. They joined their mother by James's bedside, and together they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As the day wore on, Emily's thoughts turned to the conversation she had had with James the night before. She couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at her. How could James have kept such a secret from her for so long? David too was struggling to come to terms with the news. He had always looked up to his father, but now he felt a sense of disillusionment. How could he reconcile the man he thought he knew with the man who had kept such a monumental secret? Sarah, ever the peacemaker, tried to lighten the mood. She shared stories of her childhood, of the times when James had been a loving and devoted father, but even her memories couldn't erase the pain of the present. As the day turned to night, the family decided to take a break from the hospital. They went to a nearby restaurant where they shared a meal and tried to distract themselves from the heaviness of their thoughts. But as they sat around the table, the weight of the situation pressed down on them. Emily finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with emotion. She demanded answers from James, wanting to know why he had kept his secret for so long. James, who had been quiet throughout the meal, finally spoke. He explained that he had kept the secret to protect his family, to shield them from the pain of his past mistakes. He admitted that he had been wrong to keep the truth from them, and he asked for their forgiveness. Emily, her heart breaking, reached out to James. She told him that she forgave him, that she understood why he had done what he had done. She vowed to stand by him until the end, no matter what. David too found it in his heart to forgive his father. He realized that James had been trying to protect them, even if his methods had been flawed. He promised to support his father in whatever way he could. And so, as the night drew to a close, the Johnson family found a measure of peace. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew that they would face it together as a family united in love and forgiveness. The sun rose over Chicago, casting a warm glow over the city as the Johnson family gathered once again at the hospital. James's condition had stabilized slightly, but he was still too weak to speak. Emily sat by his bedside, her eyes red from crying, as Sarah and David joined her. As they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, Sarah suddenly spoke up. "We need to talk about what Dad told us," she said, her voice firm. "We can't just ignore it and pretend everything is okay." Emily nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the past. She knew that Sarah was right. They needed to confront the secrets that James had kept hidden for so long. David, who had been quiet up until now, cleared his throat. "I think we should start by trying to understand why Dad felt he had to keep this secret," he said. "Maybe if we can understand his reasons, we can begin to forgive him." And so the family began to delve into James's past, piecing together fragments of memories and half-truths to uncover the whole story. They learned about James's difficult childhood, his struggles with addiction, and the mistakes he had made along the way. As the day wore on, emotions ran high. There were tears and anger, but there was also a sense of healing as the family began to understand the depth of James's pain. They realized that his secret had been a burden he had carried alone for far too long. That evening, as the sun set over the city, the Johnson family sat together in James's hospital room. They held hands and prayed, asking for forgiveness and strength to face the days ahead. As they prepared to leave for the night, Emily leaned over and whispered in James's ear. "I forgive you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you and I forgive you." James opened his eyes, and for a moment there was a glimmer of peace in his tired gaze. He squeezed Emily's hand, a silent thank you passing between them. And so, as the day came to a close, the Johnson family took a step toward healing. They knew that there were still difficult days ahead, but they also knew that they would face them together, united in their love for each other. The next morning, a sense of peace hung in the air as the Johnson family gathered once again at the hospital. James's condition had stabilized, and he was resting comfortably. Emily sat by his bedside, her hand clasped in his, while Sarah and David sat nearby, talking quietly. As the day wore on, the family's thoughts turned to the future. How would they cope with James's illness? How would they say goodbye? And most importantly, how would they go on without him? David, who had always been the practical one, suggested that they make a plan. "We need to think about what Dad would want," he said. "We need to make sure that his final days are filled with love and comfort." Sarah, ever the emotional one, nodded in agreement. "We need to make the most of the time we have left with Dad," she said. "We need to cherish every moment." And so the family began to make plans. They decided to take turns staying with James, ensuring that he was never alone. They also began to talk about how they would celebrate his life, planning a memorial service that would honor his memory. As the days passed, the Johnson family grew closer. They shared memories, laughed, and cried together, finding solace in each other's company. They realized that despite the sadness that surrounded them, they were still a family, and their love for each other would see them through the difficult days ahead. One evening, as the sun set over the city, the Johnson family gathered in James's hospital room. They held hands and prayed, thanking God for the time they had been given with James and asking for strength to face the days ahead. As they prepared to leave for the night, James opened his eyes and looked at each of them in turn. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for being my family." And so, as the night fell, the Johnson family stood united in their grief, facing the future with courage and love. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew that they would face it together as a family bonded by love and shared memories. The sun rose over Chicago, casting a golden glow over the city as the Johnson family gathered once again at the hospital. James's condition had worsened overnight, and he was now unconscious, his breathing shallow and labored. Emily sat by his bedside, her eyes red from crying, as Sarah and David joined her. As they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, a nurse entered the room. She informed them that James's condition had deteriorated rapidly and that he likely only had a few hours left to live. The news hit the family hard, and they struggled to come to terms with the reality of the situation. They sat by James's bedside, holding his hand and whispering words of love and comfort. As the day wore on, James's breathing became more and more labored, and it became clear that he was nearing the end. The family gathered around him, their hearts heavy with grief, as they prepared to say their final goodbyes. But then, in a moment that took them all by surprise, James opened his eyes. His gaze was clear and focused, and for a moment it was as if he was back to his old self. "I love you all," he said, his voice weak but filled with emotion. "Thank you for being my family, thank you for loving me." And then, with a peaceful smile on his face, James closed his eyes and took his last breath. The room was filled with a profound sense of loss, but also with a deep sense of peace. The Johnson family had said their final goodbyes to James, but they knew that he was at peace, finally free from pain and suffering. As they left the hospital that evening, the Johnson family walked hand in hand, united in their grief, but also in their love for each other. They knew that James would always be with them, watching over them from above, and that they would carry his memory in their hearts forever. The days following James's passing were filled with a deep sense of loss and sadness for the Johnson family. They gathered at Emily's house, surrounded by friends and family, as they began to plan James's funeral. Despite their grief, they found comfort in each other's company, knowing that they were not alone in their pain. One afternoon, as Emily sat alone in the living room, lost in her thoughts, the doorbell rang. She got up to answer it, expecting to see a friend or family member offering their condolences. But when she opened the door, she was met with a sight that took her breath away. Standing on her doorstep was a man she had never seen before. He was tall and handsome, with piercing blue eyes and a warm smile. He introduced himself as Michael, a friend of James's from his past. Michael explained that he had been traveling and had only just heard about James's passing. He said that he had wanted to pay his respects and offer his support to the family. Emily, though taken aback by the unexpected visitor, invited Michael inside. She introduced him to Sarah and David, who were equally surprised by his sudden appearance. But as they talked, they realized that Michael had known James during a difficult time in his life, and that he had played a significant role in helping James turn his life around. As the evening wore on, Michael shared stories of his time with James, painting a picture of a man who had faced his demons head-on and had come out stronger on the other side. He spoke of James's kindness, his generosity, and his unwavering faith in the face of adversity. The Johnson family found comfort in Michael's words, realizing that James's legacy would live on through the lives he had touched. They thanked Michael for his visit, grateful for the unexpected ray of light he had brought into their lives during a dark time. As Michael prepared to leave, he handed Emily a letter. "James asked me to give this to you," he said. "He wrote it before he passed, and he wanted you to have it." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she took the letter. She thanked Michael for his kindness before closing the door behind him. Alone once again, Emily opened the letter and began to read. In it, James expressed his love for her and their children and his gratitude for the life they had shared. He asked for forgiveness for his mistakes and promised to watch over them from above. As Emily read the final words of the letter, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that James was at peace and that he would always be with them, guiding them and watching over them from above. And with that thought in her heart, she went to bed, grateful for the unexpected visitor who had brought her comfort in her time of need. The day of James's funeral dawned grey and rainy, matching the somber mood of the Johnson family as they gathered at the church. Friends and family filled the pews, offering their condolences and sharing their memories of James. As the service began, Emily stood before the congregation, her voice steady as she spoke of James's life and legacy. She spoke of his kindness, his generosity, and his unwavering love for his family. She thanked everyone for their support and love during this difficult time. Sarah and David also spoke, sharing their own memories of their father. They spoke of his strength, his wisdom, and his sense of humor. They laughed through their tears as they remembered the times they had shared with him, grateful for the love and guidance he had given them. As the service drew to a close, the family gathered around James's casket for one final goodbye. They placed flowers on his casket, a symbol of their love and respect for him. Emily leaned down and kissed the casket, whispering a final farewell to her beloved husband. As they left the church, the rain had stopped, and a rainbow arched across the sky, a sign of hope and promise after the storm. The Johnson family took it as a sign that James was at peace, watching over them from above. They gathered at Emily's house for a reception, sharing stories and memories of James late into the night. They laughed and cried, finding comfort in each other's company as they celebrated the life of a man who had meant so much to them. As the night wore on, the Johnson family began to say their goodbyes. Sarah and David hugged their mother tightly, promising to always be there for her. Emily thanked them for their love and support, grateful for the family that James had given her. Alone in her house once again, Emily sat in the quiet, surrounded by memories of James. She knew that life would never be the same without him, but she also knew that his love would always be with her, guiding her and giving her strength. And so, as the night turned to day, Emily went to bed, grateful for the love and support of her family and friends, and for the memories of a life well lived. She knew that James was at peace and that one day they would be reunited in a place where there is no more pain or sorrow. The days following James's funeral were a blur for the Johnson family. They were filled with a mix of sadness and nostalgia as they tried to adjust to life without him. Emily, Sarah, and David found comfort in each other's company, leaning on each other for support as they navigated their grief. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, reminiscing about James, Sarah spoke up. "We should do something to honor Dad's memory," she said, "something that would make him proud." David nodded in agreement. "We could start a scholarship fund in his name," he suggested, "or donate to a cause that was close to his heart." Emily smiled, grateful for her children's thoughtfulness. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said. "James would have been so proud of the people you've become." And so, the Johnson family began to make plans. They decided to start a scholarship fund in James's name, to be awarded to a student from a disadvantaged background who showed promise and determination. They also decided to donate to a local charity that James had supported during his lifetime. As they worked together to make their plans a reality, the Johnson family found solace in their shared mission. They knew that James would have been proud of their efforts and that his legacy would live on through the lives they would touch with their generosity. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, reflecting on their accomplishments, Sarah spoke up. "I miss Dad," she said, her voice breaking. "I miss his laughter, his wisdom, his love." Emily reached out and took Sarah's hand. "I miss him too," she said, her own voice filled with emotion. "But I know that he's with us in spirit, guiding us and watching over us." David nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I feel his presence all around us," he said. "And I know that as long as we keep his memory alive in our hearts, he will never truly be gone." And so, as the night wore on, the Johnson family sat together in the quiet of their living room, surrounded by memories of a man who had meant so much to them. They knew that life would never be the same without James, but they also knew that his love would always be with them, guiding them and giving them strength. Weeks had passed since James's passing, and the Johnson family was slowly adjusting to life without him. Emily, Sarah, and David had thrown themselves into their work and daily routines, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of life. But despite their efforts to move on, James's absence was keenly felt, a constant reminder of the void he had left behind. One evening, as Emily sat alone in the living room, looking through old photo albums, she came across a letter tucked away in a drawer. It was from James, written before he passed, and addressed to her. With trembling hands, Emily opened the letter and began to read. In it, James poured out his heart, expressing his love for her and their children and his gratitude for the life they had shared. He asked for forgiveness for his mistakes and promised to watch over them from above. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she read the final words of the letter. She felt a sense of peace wash over her, knowing that James was at peace and that he would always be with them in spirit. The next day, Emily gathered Sarah and David in the living room to share the letter with them. As they read James's words, they felt a sense of closure, knowing that he had left them with his love and his blessing. Inspired by James's letter, the Johnson family decided to create a memory book in his honor. They filled it with photos, letters, and mementos of their time with James, creating a lasting tribute to the man who had meant so much to them. As they worked on the memory book, the Johnson family shared stories and memories of James, laughing and crying as they remembered the good times they had shared. They realized that while James was no longer with them in body, his spirit lived on in their hearts and memories. One evening, as they put the finishing touches on the memory book, Emily suggested that they hold a memorial service for James, inviting friends and family to come together to celebrate his life. Sarah and David agreed, eager to honor their father's memory in a meaningful way. And so, on a sunny afternoon, friends and family gathered at a local park to celebrate James's life. They shared stories and memories of James, laughed and cried together, and found comfort in each other's company. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, the Johnson family stood together, watching as lanterns were released into the sky in James's honor. They knew that while they would always miss him, his love would always be with them, guiding them and giving them strength. Months had passed since James's passing, and the Johnson family was slowly finding their way forward. Emily, Sarah, and David had found comfort in their memories of James and had begun to focus on building a new life without him. One day, Emily received a letter in the mail. It was from the scholarship fund they had started in James's name, informing her that they had chosen the first recipient of the scholarship. Emily felt a surge of pride and gratitude, knowing that James's legacy would live on through the lives of others. Meanwhile, Sarah had thrown herself into her work, finding solace in helping others. She had volunteered at a local charity, using her skills to make a difference in the lives of those less fortunate. David had returned to his law practice, dedicating himself to helping others seek justice, just as James had done. As they went about their daily lives, the Johnson family found that James was still very much a part of their lives. They would often talk about him, sharing stories and memories of the man who had meant so much to them. They found comfort in knowing that his love would always be with them, guiding them and giving them strength. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Sarah spoke up. "I think it's time we let go of some of Dad's things," she said. "It's been hard holding on to them, knowing that he's not coming back." Emily and David nodded in agreement. They knew that holding on to James's things was holding them back from moving forward. Together, they sorted through James's belongings, keeping only the items that held the most meaning for them. As they packed up James's things, they found themselves laughing and crying, remembering the man who had touched their lives in so many ways. They knew that while they would always miss him, he would always be with them in spirit. With James's belongings packed away, the Johnson family felt a sense of closure. They knew that they would never forget him, but they also knew that they had to move forward with their lives. They knew that James would have wanted them to find happiness and peace, and they were determined to honor his memory by doing just that. And so, as the sun set on another day, the Johnson family stood together in the quiet of their living room, surrounded by memories of a life well lived. They knew that while their lives would never be the same without James, his love would always be with them, guiding them and giving them strength as they moved forward into the future. If you enjoyed today's story and would like to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you thought. Your interaction is very important to us and helps us to keep bringing you amazing stories. Thank you for watching and see you in the next episode.